Let me tell you something about the morning of my son's wedding. It was meant to be the kind of day that gets framed, the kind people talk about 40 years later when the family sits together on a quiet Sunday evening. The flowers were perfect. The weather was kind, which if you've ever tried to plan an outdoor June wedding in Virginia, you know is almost a miracle. The venue looked beautiful. The caterers arrived on time. Everything was exactly where it needed to be, except my wife. I noticed it right away because Maggie is never silent in the morning. That woman has narrated every sunrise of our 31 years together like she gets paid per word. She hums while making coffee. She talks to the plants. One time she had a full conversation with a bird sitting on our windowsill and looked honestly offended when it flew off before she finished speaking. So when I woke up that morning and the room was quiet, completely quiet, something in my chest shifted before my mind even understood why. I sat up. Her side of the bed was empty, the sheets cold. The bathroom door was closed. No humming, no water running, no soft talking about the weather or what she planned to wear or whether Smith remembered to eat breakfast before the ceremony. Just silence. I swung my legs off the bed and walked to the bathroom door. I knocked twice, lightly, the way you do when you already feel something is wrong, but still hope you're imagining it. Nothing. I opened the door and what I saw. Stay with me here, because what I saw in that moment is the kind of thing that changes something inside a man forever. Maggie was standing at the mirror, both hands gripping the edge of the sink. Her knuckles were pale. She was still wearing her robe, and her hair, her beautiful silver hair that she had spent the last 2 years carefully growing out, was gone. Not trimmed, not styled differently, just gone. Pieces of it lay in the sink like feathers scattered after a storm. What remained on her head was uneven and rough, like someone had used scissors the way a child might, rushed, careless, almost angry. She wasn't crying. That is the part that hit me the hardest. Maggie wasn't crying. She was just staring at herself like she didn't recognize the person in the mirror. I spoke, and I want you to notice this. I spoke very softly. I said, "Maggie, what happened?" She didn't turn around. She just looked at my reflection in the mirror and said, "It was Brianna," flat and steady. Now, before we go further, you should understand something about me. I am not a man who raises his voice. I never have been. My father used to say that when a man starts shouting, he has already lost. I've carried that belief my entire life. 31 years of marriage, 17 years working as a litigation attorney, and I have never needed to raise my voice to make a point clear. But in that moment, standing there in the bathroom doorway, something very old and very quiet woke up inside me. I said, "She did this?" Maggie nodded slowly. Then she added, "She filmed it, John. She was laughing. She called it a prank." I remember gripping the doorframe because my hands needed something to hold that wasn't what they wanted to do. I asked, "Where is she now?" Maggie finally turned and really looked at me. She said, "John, not today. Please. Smith cannot find out about this today." And there it was. Even standing there looking like she had been attacked in her own home, which she had, my wife's first thought was to protect our son's wedding day. After 31 years, she still finds ways to humble me. I left the bathroom, went downstairs, and found Brianna in the kitchen. She was casually eating a yogurt parfait, the way someone eats when they haven't done anything wrong that morning. She looked up, smiled wide, and said, "Good morning, John. Big day, right?" I looked at her for a moment and said, "It is." I poured myself a cup of coffee. She started talking about the centerpieces. I nodded at the right times. Said, a couple of times. But the whole time I was watching her the way you watch opposing counsel before a deposition, looking for cracks. Because here is something you learn after years in court. Guilty people don't act nervous until they know they've been found out. Until then, they act normal. and Brianna was acting very normal that morning. She asked, "Is Maggie up? We need to leave for the venue by 11. I said, "She's getting ready." She smiled and said, "Good. I hope she loves the hairstyle I suggested. I told her it would look perfect with her hair length." She said it so smoothly, so cleanly. I set my coffee cup down and looked at her. Still calm, still quiet. I said, "Brianna, how long have we known each other?" She said, "Almost 4 years." I nodded. 4 years is enough time to understand someone, don't you think? She gave a small, uncertain laugh. I guess so. I picked up my coffee again and said, "I think so too." And then I walked out. Now I know what you might be thinking. Why didn't I confront her right there? Why didn't I say something? The answer is simple. I didn't speak because I didn't yet know everything. What I had at that moment was just the surface. What Maggie told me was only the headline. And I've spent too many years in courtrooms to react to headlines. Headlines are what people want you to see. The real story is always underneath. And something, maybe instinct, maybe 31 years of knowing my wife, told me that what happened that morning was not the start of this story. It was just the first time I was seeing it. That evening, after the ceremony, after the speeches, after Smith and Brianna drove away in a car with "Just Married" written across the back window in white polish, I sat on the edge of our bed and watched Maggie carefully remove what remained of her hair in the mirror. She was quiet for a long time. Then she opened her nightstand drawer, took out a small brown envelope and placed it in my lap. She said, "I've been waiting for the right time to show you this." I looked at the envelope, then at her. "How long?" She sat beside me, folded her hands, and said calmly, 2 years, John. I've kept this for 2 years. I opened the envelope, and that was the moment I stopped being a father-in-law and started being a lawyer. There is something about evidence. It doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about your past, your intentions, or the explanation you've been practicing in your head. Evidence just sits there, quiet and patient, and tells the truth whether you are ready or not. That night, sitting on the edge of the bed with that envelope in my hands and my wife beside me, I learned that Maggie had been gathering evidence for 2 years. 2 full years. While I slept next to her, while we shared dinners and holidays and watched Smith fall deeper in love with the woman across the table, Maggie had been quietly documenting everything. I pulled out the first item. It was a printed screenshot of a text message. I recognized Smith's number at the top. The message was from Brianna, sent about 18 months ago. It read exactly like this. "Your mom called again." I didn't answer. "You need to talk to her about boundaries or I will." I stared at it. I asked, "Maggie, when did you call Smith that day?" She said, "On his birthday." I placed the paper carefully on the bed, the way you place something fragile or dangerous. "She didn't tell him you called?" "Not that time," Maggie said quietly, "and not the 6 times after that." I reached into the envelope again. The second item was a photograph printed from a phone. It showed our living room, taken from the hallway. In the picture, Maggie was sitting alone on the couch while Smith and Brianna stood in the kitchen laughing. The timestamp read 7:43 p.m. I remembered that night. I remembered stepping outside to take a work call and coming back to see Maggie alone. She had said she was just resting. I asked, "Who took this picture?" Maggie said, "I did. I set my phone on the shelf and took it myself." I looked at her and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And this is what she said. She looked straight at me and said, "Because you love that boy more than you have ever loved anything in your life, John." And I was not going to be the reason his father started seeing his marriage in a different way before it even truly began. I had nothing to say after that. 17 years working as an attorney, and she took the words right out of my mouth. I reached into the envelope again, for the 3rd time. Now, stay with me here, because this is where the story stops being about a difficult daughter-in-law and starts turning into something much darker. The third item was a card. Just a simple greeting card, the kind you see in the seasonal aisle of a pharmacy. On the front it said, "Thinking of you." Inside, in Brianna's handwriting, it read, "Maggie, I just want you to know that Smith and I are very thankful for everything you do. You are such a special part of our lives." I looked at the card, then I looked at Maggie. I said, "She gave you this?" Maggie nodded and said, "She gave it to me 3 days after she told Smith's cousin at Thanksgiving that I was, and I quote, a lot to deal with." I said, "She really said that?" Maggie replied, "Patricia told me herself. She said I deserved to know." I placed the card down next to the photograph and the screenshot of the message. I looked at the 3 of them lined up on the bed like Exhibit A, B, and C, and I felt something shift behind my eyes. Because this is what a lawyer sees when he looks at something like that. He does not see a difficult daughter-in-law. He sees a pattern. And patterns, in my experience, do not just appear overnight. They are built carefully, step by step, piece by piece. I reached back into the envelope. There were 11 more items. I am not going to go through every single one because we would be here forever, but I will give you the important parts, and I say that with heavy sarcasm. There was a screenshot of a comment Brianna had posted in a neighborhood Facebook group under a fake name, which Maggie had traced back to her through a shared photo. The comment described an unnamed neighbor as the kind of older woman who makes every family gathering about herself. It was posted 2 days after Easter, our Easter. There was a voicemail written down by hand in Maggie's neat cursive because she had accidentally deleted the audio. It was from Brianna to Smith, intercepted on our home phone during a visit when she dialed the wrong number. In that message, Brianna told Smith that his mother had made a comment about the wedding flowers. No such comment was ever made. Maggie had not said a single word about those flowers. I know that because I was sitting right beside her when the topic came up. There was also a birthday card Maggie had received from Smith last year, the one she had cried over. The one she said was the sweetest thing he had ever written to her. I had watched her fold it carefully and place it in her jewelry box. What I did not know, what I was finding out right then at 11 at night on my son's wedding day, was that the card Smith believed he had written himself had actually been written beforehand by Brianna. Maggie had found the draft on a notepad in their guest room during a visit. Same exact words, Brianna's handwriting, with Smith's signature added at the end. She had written her husband's love for his own mother and handed it to him to send. I turned that one face down on the bed. I asked, "Does Smith know any of this?" Maggie said, "No." I said, "She made a mistake this morning, Maggie." Maggie looked at me. I said, "Everything else she did was careful. She was smart about it. But this morning she got comfortable, and when people get comfortable, they become careless." Maggie said, "John, I don't want a war." I said, "I know you don't." She said, "I mean it. Smith loves her." I said, "I know he does." She asked, "Then what are you going to do?" I picked up the envelope and carefully placed every item back inside, neat and in order. I folded the top closed and held it in both hands for a moment. Then I said, "I am going to do what I should have done 2 years ago if you had shown me this back then." She asked, "Which is?" I said, "Make sure the right people see exactly who she is. Not with anger, not with accusations, just with evidence." Then she said quietly, "She's going to say I pushed her into it. She'll try to make herself the victim." I stood up, placed the envelope into my briefcase, and closed it. I said, I pulled the phone away from my ear and opened the app. 219,000 views. The comments had changed overnight. The laughter was gone. What remained was something far less forgiving. People tagging the account. People asking for names. People who had gone through similar situations and were no longer staying quiet about it. The internet, when it decides to care about something, is extremely thorough. I put the phone back to my ear. I said, "Doug, I need an hour of your time this week." He said, "You have it. But John, before you come in, I need to ask you something." I said, "Go ahead." He said, "What's the goal here?" Because there's a difference between making her uncomfortable and making this stick. I said, "I want Smith to see who he married." Clearly without his father's fingerprints on the revelation. Doug was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the hardest kind of thing to set up." I said, "I know. That's why I'm calling you." He said, "Thursday noon, don't be late." I said, "I'm never late." He said, "You were late in 1987. I said, "That was a different century, Doug." The third call I didn't make with my voice. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and wrote an email. It was addressed to Brianna, not to Smith, not to both of them, to Brianna directly at her personal email address, which I had because she had used it to send me a Father's Day card 18 months ago. A card I now understood in a very different way. The email was 4 sentences long. It said, "Brianna, I hope the first morning of your marriage finds you well. I wanted to reach out personally to let you know that I've been thinking about what happened yesterday, and I believe the three of us, you, Maggie, and I, should sit down together when you return from your honeymoon. There are some things I'd like to share with you that I think will be useful for everyone moving forward. Travel safely." I read it back 3 times. No accusations, no anger, no hint of what was coming. Just 4 sentences that I knew would keep her awake for the entire honeymoon. I pressed send. Then I closed the laptop and went to make Maggie breakfast. They came back on a Tuesday. Brianna called me the morning after they landed. I had expected her to wait, to collect herself, to rehearse, but she called at 8:47 in the morning, and her voice had that specific tone of someone who has been practicing since the Bahamas. She said, "John, we're back. I got your email. I'm so glad you reached out. I've actually been wanting to talk to you too." I said, "Saturday 2 Adamar, our house." She said, "Of course, yes, absolutely." I said, "Just you and Maggie and me. Smith has plans with his college friends that afternoon?" There was a pause, very small. If I hadn't been paying attention for it, I would have missed it. She said, "Oh, sure, that works." I said, "Wonderful. See you Saturday." I ended the call. Maggie was standing in the kitchen doorway. She said, "She agreed?" I said, "Immediately." Maggie said, "That means she's planning something." I said, "Of course she is." Maggie said, "Does that worry you?" I said, "Maggie, I have been in rooms with people planning things against me for 17 years. You know what I've learned?" She said, "What?" I said, "People who are planning something stop listening, and people who stop listening miss everything." Brianna said, "First, I just want to say about the video. It was just a bit of fun, and I honestly didn't think." I said, "Brianna." She stopped. I said, "We're not here to talk about the video." She blinked. "Oh, okay." I folded my hands on the table. I said, "We're here because Maggie has something she'd like you to see." I nodded toward Maggie. The first page was the chronological summary I had written on my yellow legal pad. Typed neatly, dated, formatted the way I format every document that has ever entered a courtroom with me. Dates on the left, events on the right, witnesses noted where needed. I watched her eyes move across the first page. Her jaw didn't drop. She was too controlled for that. But her shoulders dropped about half an inch and did not rise again. I've cross-examined enough people to know that shoulders never lie. She turned to the second page, the screenshots, the photograph from Christmas, the voicemail transcription, the Facebook comment traced back to her fake profile. She moved to the third page, the birthday card draft, in her own handwriting, next to a photograph of the card Smith had sent, word for word the same. She stopped turning pages. The room was very quiet. Then she did what I expected her to do. She closed the folder, lifted her chin, and said, her voice impressively steady, "This isn't what it looks like. Some of this is completely out of context, and the rest of it," I said, "Brianna." She stopped again. I said, "I'm not a jury. You don't need to argue context. That folder isn't for me." She said, "Then who is it for?" I said, "It's for Smith." The color left her face so quickly and so completely that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I said, "Now, here is what happens next. That folder goes home with you today. You decide what to do with it. You can tell Smith everything, the full story in your own words, on your own terms, or you can say nothing and wait for him to find it, which he will, because I intend to make sure of that." She said, "You would do that to your own son." And I want you to notice that her first instinct was not to deny. Her first instinct was to ask what I would do. I said, "I would do anything for my son, including making sure the woman he chose to spend his life with is the woman he actually believes she is." Brianna looked at Maggie. I think she expected Maggie to soften things, to step in, to be, as she had always counted on her to be, the gracious one who absorbs the impact and asks everyone to calm down. Maggie looked back at her with the calmest expression I have ever seen on a human face, and she said very gently, the way she says everything, "I have loved Smith since before he could walk. I will love him long after I am gone. But I need him to know who truly loves him back. I think you understand that." Brianna's mouth opened, but no words came out. She picked up the folder. She stood up. She adjusted her jacket carefully. She walked toward the front door with her back held stiff and her steps slow and controlled. It was the kind of walk people use when they are trying to keep themselves from falling apart just by holding their posture tight. She reached for the door and opened it. Then she paused. She turned back and looked at me. And for the very first time since I had known her, every neat, controlled, sharp-edged layer of her completely dropped away. What was left underneath felt younger and far less sure of itself. Her voice, for once, sounded like a normal voice without any control in it. She said, "What if he doesn't forgive me?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Then I said, "That's the first honest thing you've said in this house in 4 years." He didn't shout. He didn't accuse anyone. He simply said, "Dad, did you know?" I answered, "I found out on the night of your wedding." There was silence. Then he said, "She told me Mom knew for 2 years and never told me." I said, "Your mother did know. She didn't tell you because she loves you and she didn't want to be the reason your marriage began in chaos." There was another silence, longer this time. Then Smith said, "She should have told me." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have noticed." I replied, "You were in love. Love is not a weakness, Smith." He stayed quiet for a bit. Then he asked, "Is Mom okay?" I looked across the living room at Maggie. She was sitting in her usual chair near the window, her short silver hair catching the soft afternoon light, and somehow, against everything, she looked exactly like herself. I said, "She's okay." He said, "Tell her I'll come on Sunday." I answered, "I'll let her know." I was just about to end the call when he said, "Dad," I said, "Yeah." He said, "Thank you for not making this loud." I held the phone for a second before replying. Then I said, "I learned that from your mother." Over the next few weeks, Brianna did exactly what Maggie had expected she would do. She tried to present herself as the one who was hurt. She called different family members. She sent long messages trying to explain her side of things. She cried during conversations that I only heard about later. And every single time, without fail, someone would say, "But Brianna, the video." You cannot explain away a video that has 219,000 views. You cannot change the meaning of a moment that you recorded yourself, wrote the caption for yourself, and uploaded yourself. She had already given the world everything it needed to see, using her own hands. After everything, Smith and Brianna decided to go to counseling. I'm not going to tell you how that part ends, because that part belongs to them. Some endings are not mine to share, and some stories are not meant to be handed over like that. What I can tell you is this. About 6 weeks after that Saturday meeting, on a Sunday, Smith came over to the house for dinner. He sat across from Maggie at the same table she had prepared for family dinners for 23 years. And halfway through the meal, Without anyone saying a word or asking him to, he reached across the table and placed his hand gently over hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Maggie looked down at his hand, then slowly looked back up at him. And then she did what Maggie always does. She smiled, gave his hand a small squeeze, and said, "Eat your food before it gets cold." Smith laughed. I laughed too, and for the first time in longer than I had realized, the table sounded exactly how a table is supposed to sound. The most dangerous person in any room is not the one who is loud or making noise. It is the one standing quietly near the doorway, watching, waiting, and letting the truth do what it always does in the end. It comes out. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by pressing the like button and subscribing for more real, honest, and family-focused stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this space.